I need help dusting the cobwebs off. I'm just going to get it out. I haven't recorded anything in 11 months. I forget how to upload and download and edit and release these episodes because I'm not technical. I had to write all my notes down when I was doing them before, and I forget everything and I lost my notes. So I am winging it right now, and I'm trying to I'm trying to like wipe the dust off. So help me out, bear with me, be patient. I am glad to be back. I've had a number of people reach out to me over the last few months asking if I was ever going to do this again. And I've wanted to, and I've delayed it way longer than I thought I would. But here I am releasing an episode, trying to get loose, get the rust off. Real quick, I put this podcast on hold last December. I got really busy with client work, and I'm appreciative for every client that hired me over the last year, that kept me busy for the last year, and that continues to keep me busy. I appreciate all of that. But as a result of that work, I put the podcast on hold for what I thought was just going to be a little while, and now it's been 11 months. I commit going into 2024 to release anywhere between 2 and 4 episodes a month. I am going to do my best to keep the topics relevant. I've put a LinkedIn survey out there. I put one out there recently asking people to recommend topics. Right now, management, sales, health, wellness, communication, conflict management, and then a whole host of miscellaneous topics have come into me, and I've got calls lined up with various people. So I will be bringing on guests as I always did. And my ultimate goal is to put out helpful content to people. It may not always resonate with you, but the intention is good. And I hope you get something out of whatever episode you listen to. I hope you get something out of it. Real quick, over the last year, things have been good. I've been out and about consistently for the first time since the pandemic. I'd say it's been a good year and a half of being out in front of people, speaking in front of people, training in front of people, showing up on site with clients, facilitating conversations, group coaching, everything. I've loved it. Been able to go out to lunch and breakfast and golf with clients. It's been awesome. I didn't realize how much I missed the FaceTime. I've worked for the last 10 years, I've worked in a remote capacity. And for the better part of the last 21 years, I've worked remotely. And I've thrived remotely, and I would never want to work in any other capacity than a remote capacity. That said, I value FaceTime with other people, and I missed FaceTime with other people. And I thank God that I developed a ton of great relationships pre-pandemic that sustained me during the pandemic and continue to sustain my business today. And I ran some of my clients know this. I did a run on my LinkedIn connections last year. It was about a year ago. I did a run on my connections, and I don't know how many I have, 2,300, 2,400. I don't know what the number is. I've deleted about 1,000 connections over the years, but I've got about, say, 2,300 right now. I extracted the connections. One night I just did an analysis. I've met 70 something percent face to face. I have met 70 something percent of the 2,300. And if you include Zoom connections, it's something like 74% of my LinkedIn connections I've met face to face. I don't think I'll ever need to meet anyone else for the rest of my life. If 15, 16, 1,700 face-to-face connections can't sustain my business, then I haven't done my job. But here's what I've noticed, and I'm going to comment. I have a couple of things I'll talk about, and then I'll get back into this subject. But the thing I've noticed the most, and I do a load of work with all kinds of people, all sorts of people that work from home. I work with them. I coach them. I've coached HR professionals, finance professionals, engineering professionals, you name it. I've pretty much coached it. But the category that I've coached the most, management professionals and sales professionals. And I got to tell you, sales professionals, the biggest concern I see when I go into a company is with their sales teams. And I'll comment about that, and I'll try to tie it into the push to get people back to the office versus the push to, maintain remote work setups. So real quick, over the last year, a couple of things that I've done as a remote employee of my own company, by the way. I do everything in my power to take care of myself. We don't have an infinite amount of time on this earth, and I don't want to do anything to shorten that time. So, and I want to be healthy while I'm here as best I can. Two things that I started doing over the last year and change that have been just totally, I don't want to say revitalize my energy, but have just continue to fuel my energy and alertness and enthusiasm. especially if I have to be in front of people. I don't want to be a dud. I want them to have an interest. I want them to learn from me. I want them to get something out of it. I don't want to put anyone to sleep. But the two things that I incorporated, one 15 and a half months ago, per a suggestion from my daughter, who claims that she didn't suggest it, but I know she did, Emma, is I started walking a brisk 2-mile walk. I incorporated August 1st, 2022, every single day. I've missed a few days in the last 15 and a half months. I walk 2 miles a day. It's the first thing I do after I have my coffee and I do my journaling, because I do that every day. I go on a 2-mile brisk walk, and then later on I'll do a workout or I'll play a sport or whatever. That 2-mile walk is rocket fuel. It's absolute rocket fuel. I started off at a 13.5-minute pace per mile. And just the other day, I broke 12-minute pace. I think it was 11:56 without trying. And I'm 51. I'll be 52 on Friday. I feel stronger and I feel more energy today and stronger today than I did 30 years ago. It's unbelievable. And I attribute that to walking. I was able to just recently restart playing tennis. I was never a good tennis player, but I used to play a little bit when I was like 20. And I haven't played in about 30 years. I have a group of friends. They started playing. I invited myself to play. I felt physically great, although I sucked at the game, but I've gone back a few times. I figured out how to play again. My timing is back, and I attribute it to the strength and conditioning that I've like regained through walking. And so anyway, I can't talk enough about how helpful just walking each day has been for me mentally and physically. The second thing that I've done over the last year, just to bring you up to speed on me, if you're interested, is intermittent fasting. I went years and years and years of eating every 2 hours. I was one of those people that if I wasn't eating every 2 hours, I was thinking about it. And I was irritated if I wasn't eating. And I needed the fuel and all this nonsense. But as the years go by, eating every 2 hours doesn't feel that great, especially if you're eating too much. You slow down, you fatigue, your stomach becomes a problem. It's not fun. So somebody talked to me about intermittent fasting. I decided to give it a shot. Again, life changer. So I typically would, instead of eating every 2 hours, I delay the last meal I have, say today. I won't have another meal tomorrow. I'll wait anywhere between 15 and 20 hours to have my next meal. So if I stopped eating at 4 o'clock this afternoon, I won't have a meal until 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock tomorrow. So today, for example, I stopped eating at 3:30 yesterday. My first meal today was at 10:30, which was 19 hours. I felt great. I wasn't hungry. I still have energy. I still went out on my walk. I'm fueled all the time. And so those two simple changes have changed my energy levels. And I've always been a pretty high energy person, but it's through the roof. And for those that are looking for ways to stay alert, energetic, minor things, walking, intermittent fasting, there's a whole host of other things I can comment on, but I'm not, it gets too preachy. But I'd challenge you to give both a try and tell me how you feel about it. The other thing I would say is, if you're looking for a distraction, if you're interested in additional other podcasts, for example, if you haven't listened to Smartless with Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes, check it out. 3 celebrity friends started this podcast during the pandemic. They bring on other celebrity friends as guests. They shit on each other and they have real conversations. They sound like real human beings, and they do a good job creating this very natural, candid setup that can be hilarious, serious, and informational with all their guests. I highly recommend it. I've listened to, I want to say, every episode, and I enjoy it. And I'm envious, because that's the type of podcast I want to have. But I just haven't figured out how to put it together. Although I'll continue to have guests. I envy what they have, and I think they're great. And I don't get anything for saying this, but if you're looking for something entertaining and educational, check those guys out. It's called Smartless. You can download that on Apple. All right, let's get into this whole push to get people back to the office. Now, again, I don't want to go back to the office. If I worked for somebody and you made me come to your office, I might want to go for a bit to get to know folks, but then I want to be somewhere else. As a salesperson, I don't want to be in my house and I don't want to be at my office. I want to be in front of my clients or interacting with my clients. So a lot of what I'm about to say, it applies to everybody. If you're in finance, engineering, HR, technology, sales, you've thrived at home during the pandemic in the sense that your job can be done somewhere else. You're not a first responder. You're not in the military. You don't build, you're not in construction. You're not a teacher, which, by the way, I know teachers can work virtually. It was a disaster. Teaching is more effective face to face. I'll argue that all day long. But if you're in a job that requires you to be there, you got to be there. But if you're in a job like mine or finance or technology, you've been able to do the work somewhere else. You don't have to physically be at an office. The problem is a lot of the work that we thought would get done remotely didn't get done remotely. So companies are looking at it saying, look, we've got a lot of empty space. We have leases that we've signed. We're spending money on this facility and no one's in there. And then you're at home working. I don't know who's doing what, because companies, quite frankly, and it's their own fault, did a shitty job tracking and monitoring and managing and holding people accountable. They weren't doing it before the pandemic. That's the sad part. That's really the missing link. Companies are in a punitive way trying to get employees to come back to the office. Many have actually threatened to fire them if they don't come back. And I get it. I'm not saying that people shouldn't come back. It's the manner in which the request is being made or the demand is being made. That's the problem. You want to go handle it that way, you're going to lose people or you're going to destroy your culture. But here's the reality, and I posted this on LinkedIn this morning. Before the pandemic, it's not like the office was this cauldron of accountability. It wasn't. Offices were country clubs, foosball tables, beer carts, pets, gym memberships, everything, anything other than work. Companies were going out of their way just to get people to, please say you love me. Please say you love working here. Please say we're a great place to work. Please tell us we're the best. Please don't leave. It was pathetic. And they created environments where they just wanted people to love them. And they didn't necessarily expect, they assumed, this is what they did. They assumed production in exchange for, look at all we've given you. Now you'll produce, right? No, it wasn't happening. It wasn't happening at the level that they wanted it to. So before the pandemic, companies started to pull back on all of these perks. Then the pandemic hits. Now, instead of people being in the office where they could kind of watch them or monitor them, whether they were doing anything or not, now these people that might not have been up to speed in the office were now at home. We got a big freaking problem now, because what companies realized pretty quickly is they weren't strong at holding people accountable before. Now they don't know how to do it. They didn't have recurring calls that were meaningful or helpful. So now they had to implement those. They didn't have strong onboarding programs, training programs, coaching programs. And now they had this whole host of staff spread all over the place. Some of these people weren't even equipped to get online. They didn't have, an office. I had clients calling in from their bedrooms, from their beds, in their pajamas. It was a freaking train wreck. As time went on, it settled down a little bit. People started to figure out how to manage themselves remotely. But the reality is it wasn't tight before. It got really loose during, and now companies are trying to regain control of what they've lost, which is the perception that they've lost accountability, the perception that they've lost their culture and identity. And we've got to rationalize the fact that we have all this space and no one's sitting in it. And we have employees that were here before, that were or hired later, that don't know each other. And we've got to somehow reestablish why we're here and what we're all about. I get it. But the first step is to acknowledge you probably weren't there to begin with. And you got to face the fact that you were too loose during. And now you've got to bring people back as human beings and say, hey, we effed up. This is as much on us as it is on you. How do we do this together? But to place demands and to be punitive, that's the wrong way to approach it. And you will pay the price for that. Employees, I'll say this. Shame on a lot of you, specifically the salespeople. I think, and I coach and train a lot of salespeople in different industries. And there are some great salespeople that will survive and do well whether I exist or not, because they're disciplined, they prioritize their day, they're organized, they make it a point to interact with their clients. Their clients know who they are. They knew who they were before. They know who they are now. They've nurtured and maintained their relationships, and they could survive on the freaking sun if they wanted to, and they'd make money because they're just professionals. And these people have been surviving in the world since the beginning of time. Big companies have had remote offices for years and years and years, with remote employees working out of their homes and satellite offices with no problem, and no one's ever bitched about it. But now you've got a whole host of people who have had to work from home that weren't ready for it. And here's the deal. If I understand that if you've gotten into a routine that is working for your life, like, you know, your daycare is already lined up, or you and your spouse or your partner have figured out a way in which you can live your life in this remote capacity, and you've settled in and it's working for you. That doesn't mean that it's working for the company that employs you. And it certainly doesn't mean it for them if you're not producing. And producing means different things. If you're in finance, producing is different than, say, producing in sales. Or if you're an engineer or a software developer, what you produce is different than, say, a salesperson. I'll say this, though, no matter what role you're in, one of the things that has suffered as a result of this remote thing is connection, specifically with salespeople. I don't know if I said this earlier. If I did, I apologize. I know most of the people I'm connected with, 70% of them. I coach a lot of salespeople, and who are connected to many, many more people than me on LinkedIn. I've coached salespeople 5, 6, 7, 8,000 connections plus. But most of them, especially over the last couple of years, have really struggled to initiate contact with people they don't know. They don't know how to do it. And so now it's becoming exposed. Now, I will say this, as a result of PPP money, companies became flush with cash during the pandemic. A lot of them panicked and overpaid their people because they didn't want them to be recruited out by somebody else. Plus, they needed to spend the money so they didn't get a penalty for not retaining their people. So they overpaid a lot of people during the pandemic. Some of these companies that I'm referencing had the best years in their history because of the pandemic, and because their people were able to operate from home, and they happen to sell products or services into other organizations that happen to need them at the time. So they rode a wave that, quite frankly, wasn't going to last long. And on paper, they look great. On paper, their employees or salespeople look great. But now things are changing, and the market's changing, and interest rates are high, and companies are taking a hard look at, is this really sustainable? And it's not. And now we're starting to see layoffs and all that stuff, and people are being asked to come back. Here's the thing. If you want to resist going back to the office, and this is to the employee right now, here are 3 things you better be damn sure you've gotten you're good with. One is, you better be competent. And by competent, I mean, you better be really, really sure that you know what you're doing, that you understand what you're doing, and that you're good at it, and that you get things done. And if you're not competent, and your company can't trust you to be competent, and you insist on working remotely, and you resist coming back to the office, and you're not producing, you will get fired. They will get rid of you, and they should. And that's because you're collecting money from them. You're being paid by them to not get things done, which means we don't need you anymore. So take a long, hard look in the mirror before you resist, and figure out, am I producing? Do I know enough to work on my own? Am I disciplined enough to work on my own? Am I getting it done? If not, get your ass back to the office until you prove to yourself and them that you can survive on your own. That's one thing you got to look at. 2 is your communication. And I don't mean what you say and your listening and your tone and all this crap. I mean, are you available? Are you reachable? Are you responsive? Do you acknowledge when somebody else is trying to get a hold of you? Or are you MIA? Are you off the grid? Are you inconsistently available? Do you disappear for hours on end? Do you go silent? Did your phone run out of battery? Did you run into an internet connection issue? Is that who you are? Because if it is, and you can't manage that outside of the office, you better get your ass in the office when they ask you to, because right now they're wondering what you're doing at all. And the third thing I'd say that you're going to look at is, are you reliable? Can they count on you to produce consistently on a regular basis? Can they count on you to show up on calls on time? Can they count on you to raise the flag if you see a problem? Are you proactive? Do you see what's coming before it arrives? Or are you the type of person that sits in a state of reaction, that finds problems, that finds reasons why things didn't get done? If you're like that and you're remote, you're toast. You got to look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I built to work on my own? Can I operate independently in an effective manner? Do I have the discipline to focus on the things that I need to focus on? Because right now, here's the problem. Employer and employee feel disconnected from one another. They've lost the feeling of knowing one another. And I know that the people that are struggling from home right now, and the employer that's struggling with the remote employee right now, they're struggling with the fact that they don't feel like they know each other. And I don't know you well enough to challenge that I don't think you're doing your job, or I don't know you well enough to challenge you coming into the office because I don't know if you're going to get upset with me. The reality is if we can't find a way to reconnect, this whole thing's going to fall apart. More people are going to lose their jobs. More companies are going to lose people. We got to look at it and say, hey, we did this to one another. How do we make it right? How do we come up with a fair compromise where we get some of your time here and we give you the autonomy over there? And what kind of expectations or standards do we need to establish with one another to make it okay to work in this capacity? Because we both owe something to one another. I think that's what this is going to come down to. As far as salespeople go, if you insist on a remote working arrangement and your company is questioning you and you're not producing and you're not able to get people on the phone, my question is how much of this remote time has helped you to deepen the relationships that you have with your customer base or your prospects? What are you doing to get out in front of people? What are you doing to maximize the freedom you have in a remote capacity and reinvest and allocate that time into these relationships so that you can continue to produce for this company that's paying you and allowing you all of this latitude? Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent here. But my point is both sides are equally responsible for the mess that's been created. Companies were way too loose before. They got even looser during the pandemic, and now they're punishing them. They're being punitive about it. You get your asses back to the office. It's wrong, but something has to give. Employees, you got a bunch of freedom that most of you weren't ready for, or a good portion of you were not ready for. You weren't disciplined enough to make it work. And even though you might have thrived 2 years ago, it wasn't hard to succeed during the pandemic if you were in a job that allowed you to work remotely. There was a lot of cash being thrown around. There were a lot of pay plans that were overly generous. And it's not hard to succeed when the wave is up here. Anyone can do it. It's when the market shits the bed. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's when we know who's talented and who's not talented. There are a lot of people that thrive during great markets. It's who survives and who thrives when the market sucks. Those are the great ones. And those are the ones that apply what I was just talking about. They're constantly building and working on their competence. They're excellent communicators. They're consistent producers. They're intrinsically motivated. So look in the mirror, ask yourself, to what extent am I responsible for this situation? Where do I have to give as an employee? And where do I have to give as an employer? And to what extent can we have a healthier conversation about compromising on this remote versus on-site arrangement? Please share your thoughts and feelings and opinions with me. I don't expect you to agree with everything I say. I hope that maybe I gave you an idea or two that could be helpful, and I'll do my best to get another one of these out by next week. In the meantime, connect on LinkedIn, Dave Turano. If you want to message me over LinkedIn, you can. You can also email me if you have any questions at dturano@jcegrp.com. And do yourself a favor. Please don't try to sell me something just because you connect on LinkedIn. That's a pet peeve of mine. Don't do it. I'll talk to you soon. Have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.